This is the Open University. But beware, this is not the real Open University, but a synthetic and mendacious Open University devised by Momus, a Scottish electronic folk singer.
Welcome back to the Open University, and we're talking about Quietism, which is my 2025 album, or at least the first. Maybe there'll be two, maybe more, who knows. There was a thing in the Financial Times this morning saying that AI had increased productivity in the US already and was going to do so worldwide. Definitely increasing my productivity, and I'm quite surprised by how much this record was based in AI still. So we'll get to that. But I think in running the order, the sequence of the tracks, I started going for a quick, slow kind of arrangement where you'd get sort of up-tempo bossa nova numbers followed by gruesome ballad kind of numbers. So it reminded me a bit of Momus, my 2008 album with Joe Howe, because that was also arranged in that way, and also because it was a collaboration, and it did feel very much this time as if AI was an unknown collaborator, providing me, as my collaborators do. David McClymont also, in the last decade or so, done 2 albums with him. They would give me, I would give them prompts in the sense that I would say, you know, let's do it this time a bit more world music with David. You know, we did one sort of synth pop album, then we did something that was a bit more world music and a bit more hand played, a bit more acoustic guitar from David. So that would be my prompt. Just sort of throwing that out there to them as a suggestion, and then they would come back with tracks, and then I'd make them into the finished product. And David did comment that you had to sort of suspend your ego a little bit, because basically you didn't know what the song was going to be, and you didn't really have any say in the final mix or anything. So I was the finisher in that sense. And in this same sense, I'm finishing the tracks on Quietism because they are originated by AI. Also reminds me a little bit of Hypnoprism in the sense that it's got a lot of sort of bangers. It's accessible and pleasant to listen to in a kind of slightly uneasy, easy listening way. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that even when I'm working alone, I'm essentially collaborating. Think about, say, the Athenia album. There's weird collaborations with Quincy Jones, where I rewrite at times like these, the theme tune from The Italian Job, or Benny Hill and Frankie Howard and, you know, old British comedians like that. It's a collaboration with dead people and with ghosts, a spooky sort of collaboration. And this sort of retro-obsessed and archive-centered world we live in now makes that ghost-like, hauntological even, collaboration more possible. And being an old postmodernist as well, it's something that I've always been interested in. The vintage, the past, the retro. I live on a flea market here in Paris, and it's very much every day going out and seeing things from the past and thinking, could they be reintegrated into our life? Do they say something about an otherness which we have lost? Or do they maybe fit very well into our current life and the things that we have now and that we collect now? Being a collector as well of affinities that I discover, elective affinities in the past. All these buzz phrases of Momus. But I've always been interested in other people's styles, rather than my own. So even at school I was copying, there was a boy called P.B. Smith who had this amazing handwriting with huge capital letters followed by very small letters, almost like American sort of metallic writing on cars in the 50s, you know, where it sort of be slightly slanted and slightly cursive, and it would say Plymouth or whatever it was. Or I would go to the library and there'd be these handwritten card index cards which would be written in beautiful handwriting with a Rotring fine nib pen, and I would go out and buy a Rotring and try and write like that. You know, I was always cottoning on to other people's styles, and it's a certain otherness, something I respond to, that in the neatness or the stylishness of it, but also something that isn't me and that I want to integrate into me. My first songs were influenced by The Who. You know, I started writing songs in 1967 That's very vintage. And it was, I Can See Japan was influenced by I Can See for Miles by The Who. Something Joni Mitchell said recently about Bob Dylan, oh no, didn't say recently, but I saw her being quoted recently as having said in the past about Bob Dylan that he had this fake hobo beat hipster, folkster kind of identity, and that she kind of held it against him in the sense that he wasn't an authentic artist. He was just doing very well with this kind of mask. And I love Joni, but I think that that's kind of the point of some artists like Dylan and Bowie. You could sense that they were glomming onto it. In fact, Bowie even did it with Dylan. We had a song about Dylan, sung in a kind of a Dylan-esque way. Bowie wasn't a black American gouster or whatever. He was an actor. He described himself as an actor. Actors are a theme that crop up quite a bit. In fact, the first track on the album now is The Actor. So this is what I call an exogamous impulse. Exogamy is when you're oriented sexually and reproductively to the other, to otherness, and maximizing otherness. You don't want to mate with your cousins because that's endogyny. You want to reach out to people who have a different kind of genetic equipment from you, and that's actually adaptive. That's very good for you to mingle very different types of DNA and RNA. I'm interested in also the idea that fakeness is more interesting than authenticity. You sort of reach out to things like trompe-l'œil, which are designed not to be authentic, but to look like a heavenly sky on a cathedral roof. That's trompe-l'œil. Artifice is more interesting than realness. Perversity is more interesting than normality in all sorts of ways. So it's really about art, isn't it? It's about what art does. Art tricks us in ways that we like. We want to be tricked. We don't want too much realism and authenticity in our art. So later in the album we get references to Nabokov's Despair, as filmed by Fassbinder and then acted by Bogard, who was a closeted gay man who kind of emoted amazingly well with his face. He could emote inwardness and a troubled kind of thought experience, which I suppose was rooted in his homosexuality, in fact, when he made The Victim. It's a film about being a gay man in a straight marriage who then confesses to his wife his real orientation, his real feelings. He was very good at sort of hiding in plain sight because everyone kind of knew that Dirk was gay, especially latterly when he collaborated more with European art directors. But he managed to connote the fact that his real face was a facade. He managed to make his real face look like a facade and then to have real feelings breaking through the facade, which is very British as well. I always appreciate him as the most British of actors. That's why I put him in the song I wrote called British. That there is this idea that there's a carapace of indifference behind which something passionate is surging and is occasionally breaking through. I find that very interesting, even although it's making a spectacle of hiding spectacle. That's the interesting paradox, is that you're making the appearance of having a kind of depth which is not there. In fact, it's all part of the facade. And of course, they were living in a time, people like Kenneth Williams and Dirk Bogarde were living in a time when it was still against the law to be gay. To be who you really were was against the law. So you'd make a kind of revealing show of concealment or turn it into comedy, as Kenneth Williams did, doing camp Polari kind of stuff about antique dealers called Sandy. And this became very productive. The hiding of the fact that you weren't hiding anything, or the non-hiding of the fact that you were hiding something, but in fact you weren't. This kind of endless mise en abîme. So this is a bit like an OU video, a bit like this video I'm making just now, because I'm revealing a lot of things, but also in a sense maybe hiding things about the production of this work. So I'm going to talk about the last 5 tracks today on the album, in terms of what I made, in terms of the order in which I made them. So start with noise reduction. And noise reduction is a technology which cancels out other technologies. Essentially, if you want to walk down the street with noise reduction earpods in your ears, what you're cancelling is not just the noise of people, but of traffic and car horns and sirens and things like that. Those are technologies designed very insensitively in the 20th century to make an extremely loud noise because people were sitting inside metal cages, cars in other words, insulated from sound, and therefore from one car to another car to communicate with a loud warning signal, you had to make it loud enough that it would get inside the carapace, the metal structure of the car. So all the people around about, the pedestrians, be damned with their tinnitus getting set off or whatever it is. You know, screw that. It's not about them, it's about the car drivers. And everyone was assumed, as certain societies like the American 20th century society, to be in a car anyway. So the noise volumes had to go up. You'd think they would have had some way to actually send warning signals from car to car inside the cab. But no, apparently not. You just make it a very loud noise that or make your car alarm go off. And as in Rome in the 80s, I remember, you know, when a thunderstorm hit, all the car alarms on the street, on the Via Giulia, would go off, and you'd just get this awful symphony of endless noise because the lightning had struck somewhere or something. So noise reduction, it's another take on the quietism theme, obviously, a technology of reinstating quietness. So this is very much an introvert's theme. I'm on a plane, the lyric says I'm on a plane, and there's a baby screaming, and we're going to get to Beijing eventually. But until then, I'm going to have these noise reduction headphones in. But it's also the idea of reducing the noise of, I mean, it's a political song in the sense that it's talking about the awful news headlines we're going to have to read about Trump and Elon Musk for the next 4 years, or 20 years if they have their way. In terms of, you know, how do you reduce that garbage noise of the world and the garbage noise that's going to be created by AI bots, you know, and making more and more of our content on the internet. The track was originally called À l'abri, Sheltered, and it comes from it was done on January the 2nd, the day after I did the last Open University video. It comes from a track called Silent Reflections. Basically, these tracks, I feed in the lyrics first. I tell it a prompt. So the prompt in this case was a very simple Brazilian samba using only guitar, bass, light rhythm and strings, bossa nova, Brazil, minor chords, which it pretty much followed. And so I ended up using a snatch of the AI-generated female voice. I'm not sure who that's based on, which they supplied. Kind of American voice. Have a listen.
On my right, making such a din, I switch on noise reduction. And
so the lyric I fed in was, I want to be à l'abri, sheltered, in other words. There's a storm going on around me, motorbike on my right, making such a din, I switch on noise reduction, and you're gone. On my left, on my jet, a newborn baby's raging. I'll reduce that cry of truth until we get to Beijing. So it's kind of reducing truth in a sense as well, because truth is unpleasant. The video uses Ryohei Yanagihara's 1956 cartoon Futari Samurai Homare no Kawakiri, and it's about a samurai. I started off for the video looking for public safety cartoons from the 1960s in the UK. And in fact, the waves that you see at the very beginning, that's from a public safety animation. But then I remembered that there was a much better example of that style, that 1960s jokey cartoon style, in Japan, because I saw an exhibition at Organic Depot in Tokyo in 2002 of Yanagihara's works, and learned about him then. So the clip I used actually suggests a different way of reducing noise, which is to to kill other people with a sword, which I don't recommend. Don't try this at home or out on the streets. The next track is one of the bangers. It's one of the really good ones. I think Continuity Girl. It was done on the 4th of January, and the track which Udio.com came up with was called Saudades na Neblina. I don't know what that is. Neblina, is that a place? I'm not sure. I prompted asking for a 1966 Brazil bossa with a soft male voice, sophisticated key changes and unexpected flutes and strings and polyrhythms. And what it came up with sounded to me a lot like Matthew Bogart's 1995 hit Ondulé, which is a song I love a lot. Very quirky, almost like a reggae lilting kind of thing, very minimalist keyboards. And I was a big fan of him at the time and saw him live and stuff. And this kind of modest, minimalist wit really appealed to me. So I made sort of the backing track and selected it and did my usual remixes and pushing extensions, you know, until I find something that I can use with audio. So I put things usually through a whole up to 25 or 30 iterations of the same track and remixing it and taking the stems separately and obviously doing my own arrangements then around the results.
Set in order now. Do your best to make things look the same. Now we shoot the scenes on different days. Was the ashtray an inch more full of ash? The daffodils wilted slightly more. Get the instant hair dye, spray them brown. You're the continuity girl, you make the things in my life stay the way they've been. Though we know time can be cruel, you smooth the change away from scene to scene. Was my hair this full last season? Did my skin have freckles then? They became the liver spots of age.
Erros passados guardem meu olhar. Busquei refúgio em cada madrugada, mas a lembrança sempre volta a falar. Quando a lua chega ao céu, saudades me invadem sem parar.
Time can be cruel, you smooth away the change from scene to scene. Does anybody still remember me? The way I used to look in season 3. If they changed the actor now, would anyone even care? You could make the new guy look just like me. You're the continuity girl, you make the things in my life stay the way they've been. Though we know time can be cruel, you smooth the change away from scene to scene.
I got the idea in the morning, after having done this the day before, I got the idea the next morning of a continuity girl in a film. You would often get best boy, you know, credits at the end of a film, best boy, whatever that is. I don't even know what the best boy is. And continuity girl, when back in the days when gendered job descriptions were still possible. A continuity girl basically had the job of making sure that looking at photographs and references from the last shoot, if you were doing a continuous sequence several days later or months or weeks later, whatever, that everything, all the props were in the right place, you know, everything as far as possible matched, so there wouldn't be obvious continuity gaps. Or in the case of, say, Just a Gigolo, the David Hemmings film, when he acts apparently with Marlene Dietrich, they're actually in different cities. Dietrich did her side of the room in Paris, Bowie did his side of the room in Berlin. They never met, much to his regret, because he was a big fan of Marlene. And of course the continuity then had to be that the potted plants and things looked roughly the same, that it was plausibly the same room, although they were in different cities. So if you have a life full of disjunction and disruption, you need a continuity girl in your life. You need someone who's going to persuade you that, you know, you are the same person, you're still lovable. You know, your girlfriend essentially is doing that job of making sure that things stay, there's a certain consistency which is maintained in your life. Because although it's nice to have variation in your life, it's the old principle of repetition and variation, you do want at least the illusion that you are the same person you were yesterday and that you're going to have the same kind of life. If you have a nice life, that is. I suppose you have less vested interest in that if your life is miserable. So I thought, yeah, a continuity girl. It's a kind of noise reduction in the sense of noise as a kind of information coming into the system, data coming into the system which is not relevant. It's noise reduction to have continuity. Again, it's turning into a concept album, this about Quietism. And the video uses manga devices, just me dancing around here in the tiny studio flat I live in Paris. But it uses kind of manga devices like the kind of the rays and the clouds passing, sort of visual disruptions of the image here, puffs of smoke, to represent the disruptions in the image of me singing. And I wanted to put in some Yuichi Yokoyama imagery as well, since I was using that kind of manga vocabulary, but in the end I didn't. I thought it was better just to keep it simple. The next track, another banger, it's Imperial Phase, and this was done on the 6th of January. The audio generation track was called Echoes of Rimini, because I put in some lyrics about Rimini. The prompt I gave was I wanted Italo disco, a male falsetto, minor chords, melancholy synth. I was really getting into singing in a higher register because I realized I'd been mumbling a lot. The style of the bossa songs is to the sort of Tom Jobim kind of style where you're singing very intimately, very softly, and in a sort of low or medium register. And I thought I really want to go up into my high registers again, so I said falsetto for this one, acoustic guitar, and 1984 Rimini. I don't know why I suddenly thought Rimini disco. Rimini, just this town on the Italian coast known for its discos, and Portuguese though. So Rimini, but Portuguese music. So I was getting more into the idea of synth pop from Brazil or even from other like South European countries, and basically the audio really delivered for this one, because later in one of the tracks there's this amazing riff that comes through, this synth riff. I guess it does get it a little bit into John Mouse or Ariel Pink kind of territory, because it's kind of weathered, fatigued synth pop, retro 80s, not so doomy. John Mouse would be a bit more Joy Division-y and a bit more doomy, but it really bang, it just came from the machine this time very much. And the idea of your imperial phase, this is the Pet Shop Boys often talk about their imperial phase in their career, when they had all the hits in the late 80s essentially. That was their imperial phase. And I thought, well, maybe this is my imperial phase. And sometimes I joke to Noémie that, where is my medal, Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres, from the French state, the Knight of French culture. It's like a medal you get, and they're quite generous. They give them to quite a lot of people. It's not like being knighted in Britain where you sort of become a member of the aristocracy. Here they killed their aristocracy, but it is a kind of honorific thing, recognizing that you had a cultural contribution. So getting to the state, I'm not going to be inducted into the Académie Française or anything like that, but the Chevalier des Arts et des Lettres would be nice. And often I'm awarding medals to Noémie as well. It's sort of game we play that I say, here's a medal for your kindness or fidelity or whatever it is. The next track was Imposter Syndrome, and this one, it took a long time, it took a lot of work, this one. The prompt for audio this time was 1980s Brazilian synth pop with the bossa nova feeling, drum machines and synths, samba canção, electronic and synthesizer. So staying with the kind of, still Brazilian, but more like a 1980s, more commercial, mainstream kind of take. And imposter syndrome is just one of these phrases that, like noise reduction, these are all kind of buzzword phrases that are out there. Imposter syndrome is, actually I first heard it being used by Faye Weldon, the British writer, when she was giving a talk in Aberdeen, and she said, you know, when you're successful as a writer, you feel imposter syndrome. You feel like your previous kind of neglect has formed your character, and you have a low self-esteem and a low sense of your own importance, and then suddenly people are telling you you're important and noticing you, and you feel like your new self is an imposter. It's a mask that you're willing to wear. You're happy to be successful and to step into that role, but you're essentially feeling like an actor. So I have a slightly different take on it. So usually it means you feel like a fraud and you can't quite believe others' impression of you. Your self-evaluation is lower than that. But in that case, in my take, it's based on, say, a confidence trickster. I was thinking of Felix Krull by Thomas Mann. This is his unfinished last novel about a confidence trickster, which is kind of a disguised autobiography. But it's also about the nature of art, that you essentially are taken at your word. You become, whoever you can persuade people you are is who you do become. But in a sense, I looked at that backwards and I said, well, you know, your persuasion is actually really just a kind of post facto rationalization of who you are unchangeably, who you essentially have to be. You're destined to be this person you've always been. And the only thing that changes really is that you kind of persuade people. If you're a confidence trickster, you kind of persuade people that you are a confidence trickster and you have a fake identity, when in fact you're purveying your real identity. That's sort of the essential idea of the song. And it starts off with this line about my father died in a giant vat of chocolate, and that's from another novel. That's from Despair by Nabokov, which was filmed by Fassbinder with Dirk Bogarde in the lead role. So back to Dirk. And this idea of hiding in plain sight, but actually not, you're hiding itself, becoming a pretense of hiding, when in fact you're showing who you really are, not disguising your identity or your intentions in the slightest. You just pretend, as the song chorus says, you just pretend that the real beauty of imposter syndrome is that you just pretend that you're not who you really are. You're born with the bravado to make your real face look like a facade. So I can identify with that, I think. The pretense is not that you're someone else, but you're anything other than the obvious and inevitable self you are. No disguise is necessary, therefore just charm. You just have to charm people into accepting who you really are, and then pretend that you're being very clever. It's a double jeu, a double game. Pretend you're being very clever and becoming someone else. Because people love self-construction as well. And there are a lot of films and things. What is it? The Notorious Mr. that famous one, DiCaprio playing a confidence trickster. But Nabokov's Despair, the lead character is Herman, he's called, and he's a chocolate entrepreneur. Fassbinder filmed it at the end of the 70s, and Dirk Bogarde does actually remind me of my father, so that's why it says my father. The idea of being a successor as well, the word successor keeps cropping up in the lyric, and it's about the idea of being an epigone. You kind of feel when you're a boy watching your father that he's the real thing. And I kind of feel like when I watch Dirk Bogarde, I think, wow, the elegance of those people from that generation, my dad's generation. They wore tailored clothes and they were sort of dandy-ish in a restrained way, and they were very British in the sense of hiding their true feelings about a lot of things, but then letting it come through, apparently, in kind of suppressed emotion. It's also the idea of sublimation and repression as a kind of interesting artifact, especially one to fake, when you're faking that. And Bogarde's face in the video I made for this, so excellent for just showing a kind of inner turmoil through this facade, which is in itself paradoxically a facade as well. The repression is a facade. So Herman, in the film, he's split. He's watching himself a lot in the early scenes. He's increasingly convinced that a man who doesn't look like him at all is his double, which is also this idea of the facade cracking. A sort of schizoid projection where he thinks he has to kill, starts hearing voices saying that he has to kill this man, a homeless man he meets who doesn't look like him at all, but who he thinks is his double. So it's kind of going back to Gogol and Dostoevsky as well, the fantastical Russian tradition that he came out of, Nabokov, of the double, writing about doubles and people having delusions about their doubles and things. So Imposter Syndrome, I think it turned out pretty well. I didn't like it very much when I was working on it because it was such a lot of work, and it was lugubrious, and the arrangement was getting too baroque, appropriately enough, because the baroque is about encrusting detail upon detail on a facade, So, but with the video, it really clicked. I think with Dirk Bogarde, you can sell anything with Dirk Bogarde. The Actor, it was the last track I did, and it's the first track on the album. So, Echoes of the Past was the audio track which got generated from my prompt and from the lyrics I fed in. And the prompt was Brazil 1984, synth pop, Portuguese, minor key, melancholy, lush arrangement, literary, bossa, samba, dramatic. So pretty much describing the last track I did as well. And the result was something I was calling Benatar, because it was a very fast BPM track with an 80s LA sound, and I thought, although I don't really know what Pat Benatar sounds like, I thought this might be Pat Benatar, but also kind of Steely Dan and Hall & Oates kind of feel. And having used Dirk Bogarde in the previous song, the idea of the actor was fresh in my mind, and this idea of just connoting troubled inner thoughts with twitches of your eyebrows, the corners of your mouth, or the inward gaze, which he would glaze over Bogarde, and you could see him looking inwards, and wonder, you would have to wonder what he was thinking. It's the thing that films can't really do, that novels can actually just tell you someone's inner dialogue, tell you what they're thinking with a God gaze. But with films, you have to get an actor who can actually show what it looks like when someone is thinking. But his inward gaze, of course, is really directed outwards, because it's really for the benefit of the viewers. So it's not really, it's just a fake inward gaze. So the actor's it's almost like these Kraftwerk songs like The Model, where you take a sort of reductio ad absurdum kind of take on a social role. The fakeness of the actor, whose identity is artificial and fluid. And that's interesting. Is the actor a boy? Is he a girl? Is he CGI? Is he real? Is he divine? And he lives in LA, but he hates it. Sort of a bad timing, actually, because LA was suffering horribly with fires and things as I was writing this. But the inauthenticity of the LA lifestyle is making him sick, and you often hear this from actors or from Bowie when he lived in LA, that it was driving him crazy with drugs and Satanism and all the rest of it. And Bowie is in there, of course. Bowie did have some actor friends who might well have taken his son to the zoo. So Duncan is at the zoo in this, it could be Gary Oldman, who was a good friend of Bowie actually, taking Duncan to the zoo and doing the voices of the giraffes and other animals. And then Bowie laughing at that, because Bowie made his brand this inauthenticity, this synthetic quality of glomming onto other people's styles and changing each record. So this became a confection of imagery. And Bowie found LA very toxic. So looking in the mirror, confecting an image for yourself using AI filters. I kind of feel this myself if I make a video using AI filters or make a song using AI, I think, well, this is not really me. But then in the end, the song does become my song, and I think, who else could have made this song? 100 other people with the same AI program would not come up with the same music, because they wouldn't use the lyrics I use, they wouldn't use the prompts I use, and they wouldn't arrange it afterwards in the way that I arrange it. And their voice obviously would sound different. So you're going to get totally different results from this machine. It's a machinery of sufficient sophistication that you're not going to get a repetition. And so when you get a banger given to you, you just think, this is not going to repeat. It's not going to, give this to someone else if I don't want it. It's not an auction, for the best bangers. It can keep doing this infinitely because of what it is. That is what it does. It just generates stuff, and sometimes it's garbage. I still use the Pareto proportion, and 80% of what it generates is not usable and is not interesting, and I just move on. But then it gets the germ of something really good, and then I push that through, the the alterations that you can ring, the changes you can ring on it, until it's something that I approve of and that I could use. So the actor croaks at the end of the song, and in death he's mourned by ghostwriting clickbait chatbots. There's something happening, it's really happening. I met up with my cousin while I was making this album. My cousin from Prestwick, who lives in Glasgow now and is a statistics lecturer, retired. And of course, AI is very much based on statistics. And he was talking about how the future of the internet is basically a lot of chatbots talking to other chatbots. I mean, Facebook recently claimed they were going to put a lot of chatbot content on there. So people posting, or apparently people posting, who are actually not real people at all, and they're just providing content. And I realized that I watch a lot of YouTube videos now. I might watch them to 50% of the way through the video and then realize it's actually, the voice is not real. I can generate these voices too, you know, the Open University voices I use, they're artificially generated announcer voices. But you can get very convincing ones now. So it takes me about to 50% of the video to realize that this is not generated by a human. It's a history of, you know, Elton John's career or something like that, but it's got a clickbaity title saying, you know, oh my God, what's happened to Elton John now? A picture of him looking about 150 years old. You've got to click on it because you think, wow, this is a terrible story, but very interesting. But then you realize it's actually terribly boring because it's just generated by these bland AI chatbots and narrated by them and even edited by them for all I know. And then, so I was saying to Adrian, my cousin, at the moment it's 50%, but in the future, you know, in a year's time, I can see it being 100% before I realize that this was not a real video generated by a real person. But, you know, what is real? What is fake? Ask an actor. So I made a dancing around the room video again for this one because it's fun to be Hall and Oates in your bedroom. I am still the guy with the hairbrush in the bedroom dancing around. And that's a lot of fun. I'd rather have stayed this kind of amateur than become a professional and have to pay people thousands to make slick videos. My conclusion about this album is that I like it. I like listening to it. You know, you can hear it on Bandcamp now. You can buy it on Bandcamp now if you're kind, or you know, support me on Patreon if you're even kinder. It's essentially a very listenable album, and you know, I feel it does have that otherness that I feel like it's a collaboration or it's a reaching out. Bossa was obviously the theme this time. It wasn't K-pop like last time. So I reached out to a South America which was imaginary, but which led me to some culturally interesting areas like magic realism. You know, there's bits of Cesar Aira coming up, and you know, but also this return to kind of 80s American style a little bit, and then coming back to Europe with Fassbinder and Rimini Disco, and unexpectedly hitting all these sort of little targets which have been important to me at some point. And what's surprising in the end is that it is a Momus album. It sounds like a Momus album. It doesn't sound like something AI generated. So I don't know if that's worrying or not. Is this me reaching that 100% stage where people are 100% convinced that I'm really composing? There's still a couple of doubters and people who think that I shouldn't be doing this and it's sad and they're departing from my fandom because I'm joining an awful tendency of faking everything. Essentially, I've always been faking things and I've always been rewriting other people's material or collaborating with other people. John Henriksen, and also in the early 2010s. You know, these collaborations are some of my best records, and I continue to collaborate just now with machines. The otherness of the music itself is a key part of what I do, and I think that's what's given me such longevity and prolificity as an artist, is that, you know, there's an endless series of things that fascinate me. I'm not terribly impressed by myself. I don't want to just sort of admire my own inherent habits and tendencies to do the same kind of chord sequences and things over and over again. I'd much rather reach out. And I think this is something that we Europeans, or British people, if you like, understand. The great post-war pop of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, for instance, a lot of it is pastiche, and a lot of it is taking American models and saying, you know, we're not authentic black people, we're not Little Richard, you know, Chuck Berry, whatever, we're not Americans. But we did import your music and we listened to it and we studied it. We worked out how it fitted together, how the Everly Brothers harmonies worked. And then we kind of did our own thing with it. So there's this remove, this distance that you get when you're sort of pastiching, taking things apart, a bit like how the Japanese were supposed to in the 80s or whenever they were reputed to be copying the West, but doing it better, taking things apart, putting them back together better, more cleverly, and then selling them back to the West. That's what we did with the beat boom in the early 60s, selling American pop music formulae back to the Americans, but doing it better and with a kind of charm and an otherness which reinvented it and refreshened it for the Americans' own ears. So I think this is what I would claim about what I'm doing here. I'm also, Scottish, so I'm a cheapskate, so I like getting stuff free. I'm a sort of a plagiarist or a magpie, and I like I also a collector of vintage and retro and things like that, so I love getting secondhand clothes and recontextualizing them and making them relevant to my style today. Or clothes from other cultures, Japanese clothes, whatever, that's always been my modus operandi. So pastiche and kind of juxtaposition of elements, collage. And thievery. Picasso said that, great artists steal, and of course you do. And Bowie did that, he rewrote Golden Years. It's a rewrite of, Carlos Alomar was taken aback when Bowie first played him, saying, that's another song. And I feel like those musicians, those post-war beat boom musicians who kind of made American music, reappropriated American music, I kind of feel a bit like them, because they felt a distance from the idioms that they were using. Mick Jagger obviously doesn't talk the way he sings. That teaches you the inherent plasticity of the medium you're using. And I love that feeling, because a plasticien in French, it's another word for an artist, like a plastic artist. We say it in English too, a plastic artist. It doesn't mean you work with plastic, but it means that there's a plasticity in whatever material you do use, like whether it's clay or paint or whatever, you're manipulating it, because it comes from the Greek word plastikos, which is to manipulate, to shape, to form, to mold, to reshape. And so this is very much it's an AI album, but it's a plastic album in that sense, in the sense that it's been used artistically, reshaped, remolded, and myself reshaped and remolded by it. So back to that reshaped song on the last album, Driving Into the Night. See you next time.
Open University.
That's your guarantee. What defines me just reminds me of everything you hate to see me. But you reshape me and you remake me till I've run out of skins. And then